In the coldest hour of a Vermont night, a German shepherd stood chained beneath an abandoned timber scale. Around Junot's neck hung a handwritten warning meant for the elderly widow waiting for him at home. Rhett Donovan had spent years believing silence could protect the people he loved. But that note forced the retired Navy SEAL to ask what protection truly meant. Not taking control, not speaking over the frightened, not walking away when help became costly. Sometimes courage is simply standing beside someone until fear no longer holds the pen. Tell us where you're watching from, and please like and subscribe to help us reach 5,000 subscribers and keep these stories alive. January had tightened its hand around Frost Lantern, Vermont. Snow lay bright over the maple hills, gathering along stone walls and the roofs of sugar houses where white smoke rose into a pale blue morning and disappeared without hurry. At night, the country roads became narrow silver ribbons between the trees, erased at the edges by wind and drifting powder. Porch lamps burned behind curtains. Barn roofs bowed beneath frost. Even the frozen ponds seemed to hold their breath. Rhett Donovan preferred Rhodes at that hour. Rhodes did not ask why a man had stopped speaking to his wife years before she finally left. Rhodes did not lean across the kitchen table and say, "Tell me what happened over there." Rhodes only asked whether the blade was low enough, whether the salt spreader had jammed, whether the next curve had iced over beneath the fresh snow. Those were questions Rhett knew how to answer. At 51, he still carried the broad shoulders of his military years, though time and labor had thickened them into something less polished and more useful. His strength now came from lifting plow chains, splitting maple rounds, changing hydraulic hoses in weather cold enough to make metal burn the skin. His face was long, marked by a slightly uneven jaw and deep lines beside the mouth. A patch of silver stood out at his left temple beneath the edge of a dark green wool cap. He wore an olive drab combat shirt beneath a short brown work coat, camouflage sleeves showing at the wrists where the cuffs had been pushed back. The old shirt was not a uniform anymore. It was simply warm, close-fitting, and built to survive work. That was how Rhett preferred most things now, useful enough that nobody needed to ask what they once meant. He had finished the last private road near Wrenwater shortly after midnight and was heading home along County Route 9. The plow truck rattled over frozen ruts, its orange roof light turning the snowbanks briefly gold before leaving them white again. His house waited 3 miles ahead, beside the old sugar road that had once belonged to his father. No one would be awake inside. The thought did not hurt the way it used to. It had become more like a loose hinge, noticeable only when the wind moved through it. Rhett slowed near the abandoned Frost Lantern timber scale. The structure sat beside the road where logging trucks had once stopped to be weighed before heading south. The weighing platform had rusted into the ground. The office windows were boarded. Snow had swallowed the faded yellow lines and buried the old warning signs up to their lower edges. Something moved near the central steel post. Rhett eased off the throttle. At first he thought it was a torn tarp snapping in the wind. Then the truck's headlights swept across 2 amber eyes. He braked. A German shepherd stood beside the post, chained close enough that it could not leave the narrow patch of packed snow around its feet. The dog did not bark. That troubled Rhett more than barking would have. He set the truck in park, left the engine running, and climbed down. Snow came nearly to the tops of his boots. The cold struck through his coat immediately, dry and sharp, the kind that made each breath feel newly invented. "Easy," he said. The shepherd watched him approach. It was a large male, perhaps 6 years old, with a deep chest and a long, solid body. The coat was black across the back and golden along the legs, throat, and sides of the face. One ear stood straight. The other tilted slightly outward at the tip. A narrow streak of gold ran unevenly along the bridge of the nose. The dog was too healthy for the scene. Its coat was brushed. Its weight was good. The nails were trimmed. There was no look of neglect in its body, only the rigid stillness of an animal that had recently learned something terrible about human hands. Rhett crouched several feet away. The chain was looped around the post and fastened with a padlock. A clear plastic pouch hung from the dog's collar, tied with a strip of red cord. "You belong somewhere," Rhett said. The dog's eyes remained on him. Rhett slowly removed one glove and held out the back of his hand. The shepherd did not move forward. Instead, it glanced once toward the road behind Rhett, then toward the dark timber scale office. Checking exits. Rhett knew that habit. He had carried it into grocery stores, restaurants, and his own bedroom. Celeste had once asked why he always chose the chair facing the door. He had answered with a shrug, as if habits had no history. The dog gave a low breath through its nose. Not a warning, a measurement. Rhett stayed still until the dog's shoulders lowered by the smallest degree. Then he reached for the plastic pouch. Inside was a folded piece of paper, damp at one corner but still readable. The handwriting was blocky and deliberate. "You have 72 hours. Sign the documents on Monday." Next time, the dog will not be left where someone can find him. Below the message was a code. WL-17, nothing else, no name, no number, no company letterhead. Rhett read it twice. The second reading changed the cold. It was no longer weather, it was intention. The shepherd watched Rhett's face as if waiting to learn what kind of man had found him. Rhett took out his phone and photographed the dog, the chain, the post, the note, and the tire marks, half filled by new snow. Then he called the county dispatch office. The deputy arrived 28 minutes later in a cruiser crusted with road salt. He was young enough that Rhett could not remember his name, though he recognized the tired politeness of someone working the winter overnight shift. Together they documented the scene. The deputy cut the chain after confirming the padlock could be collected as evidence. He checked the nearest animal shelter and learned that a transformer failure had left the building without reliable heat. "You able to keep him until morning?" the deputy asked. Rhett looked at the dog. The shepherd was standing beside the truck now, still not pulling away, though every metallic sound made the muscles along its back tighten. "I have a heated garage." "That will do. Do not remove the collar or tags." Rhett nodded. The collar held a round town registration tag worn pale around the edges. Junot. Beneath it was a veterinary number and a fixed telephone number so faded that 2 digits were nearly gone. "Junot," Rhett said. The dog's left ear shifted. There it was. Recognition, not trust, but proof that the name had once been spoken kindly. Rhett opened the rear transport compartment mounted behind the truck cab. The metal latch clicked. Junot froze. The reaction was immediate and complete. The dog lowered its head, planted all 4 paws, and stopped breathing for a beat. No growl, no struggle, only refusal shaped by fear. Rhett looked at the barred door, then at Junot. "All right," he said. He closed the compartment again. The dog did not relax, but its eyes followed him differently after that. Rhett opened the passenger door to the cab instead. Junot stared at the high step, then at Rhett. Snow gathered across the dog's back. "I am not lifting you unless you make me." Junot remained still. Rhett waited. He had not always been good at waiting. In the service, speed had been praised. At home, speed had become interruption. Celeste would begin a sentence, and Rhett would solve the problem before she finished naming it. The memory came without invitation. Celeste standing at the sink, saying, "I do not need you to fix the room, Rhett. I need you to stay in it." Junot placed one front paw on the running board, then the other. A moment later, he climbed into the passenger seat. Rhett shut the door softly. At home, the garage smelled of maple wood, cold iron, and the faint sweetness of old syrup soaked into the beams. Rhett turned on the wall heater and spread 2 blankets near his workbench. Junot entered slowly. The dog ignored the bowl of kibble Rhett set down. He sniffed the water, but did not drink. Instead, he walked the perimeter of the garage, checking the side door, the interior door to the house, and the vehicle entrance. When Rhett turned the deadbolt, Junot flinched so hard that one shoulder struck the workbench. Rhett immediately unlocked it again. The dog stared at him. "I know," Rhett said quietly. "I do not like locked doors either." That was not exactly true. Rhett had built his adult life from locked doors. The bedroom door after nightmares. The bathroom door when Celeste cried in the kitchen. The door of the sugar house after the divorce papers came. But tonight, for reasons he could not explain, he left the garage door unlatched. He called the veterinary number. A woman answered on the 5th ring, her voice alert despite the hour. "Laurel Keene." Rhett introduced himself and read the registration number. There was a pause. "You have Junot?" The sharpness in her voice made him sit straighter. "I found him chained at the old timber scale." Another pause, longer this time. Dr. Laurel Keene was 58, though Rhett knew her only by sight from town, a tall, quick-moving woman with short ash-blonde hair and the habit of carrying a green medical bag as if it were part of her body. "Is he injured?" she asked. "No obvious injuries. Cold, frightened, good weight." "Has he threatened you?" "No." "He has no bite history, no aggression record. His vaccinations are current. He has been cared for consistently for years." "Can you tell me who owns him?" "Not until law enforcement confirms your report." Rhett looked at Junot. The dog had finally approached the water bowl. He drank twice, then returned to watching the entrance. "He did not walk there on his own," Laurel said. "Not through this weather, not from where he lives." "Where does he live?" "You will have that answer in the morning." Rhett almost pressed harder. The old instinct rose immediately. Ask better questions. Remove uncertainty. Take control of the space. Then Junot looked at him. Rhett let the question go. Laurel promised to contact the county investigator who handled vulnerable adult cases and arrive after daylight. When the call ended, Rhett found a folding camp chair and set it beside the heater. He placed a blanket where Junot could see all 3 doors. The dog circled once, but would not lie down. Hours passed. The heater clicked. Snow whispered against the garage windows. Rhett's neck stiffened as he drifted in and out of sleep. Sometime before dawn, Junot crossed the concrete floor. Rhett felt the movement, but did not open his eyes. The dog sniffed the pair of black snow-plowing gloves beside the chair. Then, carefully, Junot lowered his head onto them. Rhett stayed motionless. The gesture was small enough to miss if a man had spent his life waiting only for alarms. By morning, the storm had softened into bright, drifting snow. Laurel arrived with Lieutenant Dana Bell, a compact woman of 53 with short black hair threaded with silver and a dark red notebook tucked under one arm. Dana spoke little as she examined the note, the collar, and the photographs Rhett had taken. Laurel knelt near Junot without reaching for him. The dog's body loosened when he recognized her. "You know me," she murmured. "That is useful." After checking his paws, temperature, and coat, Laurel stood. "He belongs to Evelyn Harrow," she said, "a widow on Renwater Lake." Dana closed her notebook. "We will take him home, confirm the owner's condition, and begin with the chain and the threat." Rhett nodded, though the words "begin with" suggested a road much longer than the one outside. He prepared the truck. When he opened the rear transport compartment, Junot stopped several feet away. His head lowered. The air around him seemed to tighten. Rhett understood before Laurel spoke. "Something happened in a vehicle like that," she said. Rhett shut the barred door. Dana watched him walk around to the passenger side. "You cannot transport every piece of evidence in the front seat," she said. "He is not evidence." The answer came faster than Rhett intended. Dana studied him, then glanced toward Junot. "No," she said. "Not only that." Rhett opened the passenger door. This time, Junot did not move immediately. He stood in the snow, amber eyes fixed on Rhett as if measuring the distance between what a man said and what a man would do. Rhett stepped back. No command, no hand on the collar, no attempt to make trust arrive before it was ready. Junot climbed into the cab on his own. Rhett closed the door gently and walked around to the driver's side. It was not friendship yet. It was not healing. It was only the first agreement between them. Rhett would not pull. Junot would not run. By 8 in the morning, the storm had polished Vermont into something almost innocent. The road to Wrenwater Lake curved between white birches and low stone walls buried to their shoulders. Sunlight flashed from the snowbanks with such brightness that Rhett had to lower the visor in the plow truck. Beyond the trees, the frozen lake appeared and vanished in pieces. Silver, then blue, then silver again. Junot sat upright in the passenger seat. He had not relaxed during the drive. His body remained angled toward the windshield, but one amber eye tracked every farmhouse, side road, and mailbox they passed. When Rhett slowed near a junction, the dog leaned forward. When the truck continued, he settled back without ever fully resting against the seat. Dr. Laurel Keene followed in her dark station wagon. Lieutenant Dana Bell drove behind her in an unmarked county vehicle. No sirens, no convoy drama, just 3 vehicles moving carefully along a winter road toward a woman who did not yet know whether her dog was alive. The Harrow property appeared beyond a rise. A narrow lane descended toward the lake, bordered by young birches and fence posts capped with snow. The house stood on a broad piece of land above the frozen water, painted pale gray with dark green shutters. A small greenhouse leaned against the eastern side, its glass roof half covered in snow. Firewood had been stacked under a shed in precise rows. The front walk had been shoveled clean enough to expose gravel. Nothing about the property suggested confusion or neglect. Rhett noticed the details automatically. Clear chimney cap, recently repaired porch rail, sand scattered over the icy steps. A red snow shovel placed blade down so meltwater would not freeze inside it. Someone here paid attention. Junot recognized the place before the truck reached the yard. A sound rose from deep in his chest, not a bark, not quite a whine. His paws scraped against the floor mat. Rhett slowed and stopped 20 feet from the porch. The front door opened. Evelyn Harrow stepped outside without a coat. She was 74, tall enough to carry age without appearing small, though her frame had narrowed over the years. Her silver-white hair curved beneath her chin, held on one side by a metal clip, shaped like a maple leaf. She wore a burgundy turtleneck, a cream cardigan, and dark wool trousers tucked into house boots. For 1 second, she only stared. The caution in her face was unmistakable. So was the exhaustion beneath it. Then Junot saw her. Rhett opened the passenger door. The dog launched himself into the snow. Junot? Evelyn spoke his name once, and all the restraint the dog had carried through the night broke apart. He crossed the yard in heavy bounds, nearly slipping near the porch, then pressed his head against her chest. Evelyn wrapped both arms around his neck. Her face disappeared into the thick fur along his shoulders. Junot did not jump or circle. He leaned. The force of it pushed Evelyn back 1 step, but she stayed upright. "You foolish, beautiful thing," she whispered. "What did they do to you?" Junot made a low, trembling sound. Rhett looked away toward the lake. Some reunions felt private, even when they happened in the open. Dana walked first toward the house, keeping her hands visible. Laurel followed with her medical bag. Rhett remained by the truck until Evelyn lifted her head. Her eyes were pale blue, sharp despite the tears. "You found him?" "At the old timber scale." Evelyn's arms tightened around Junot. "In this weather?" Rhett nodded. The gratitude he expected did not come. Instead, her gaze moved to Dana, then Laurel, then back to him. "Why are there 3 of you?" Dana introduced herself and explained that the chain, the note, and the circumstances required a preliminary investigation. Her voice was calm, neither softening the facts nor sharpening them. Evelyn listened without interruption. Junot turned sideways and positioned himself between her and the road, facing the 3 visitors. His posture was not aggressive. His mouth remained closed, ears forward, body steady. Still, the message was clear. He was home now. Laurel crouched several feet away. "Hello, old friend." Junot glanced at her, then returned his attention to Evelyn. "I would like to examine him inside," Laurel said. "Only if that is all right with you." Evelyn hesitated, then stepped back and opened the door. The house smelled faintly of wool, wood smoke, and dried orange peel. Framed photographs stood along a built-in shelf, most of them showing a broad-faced man with thinning gray hair beside Evelyn at different ages. In several, Junot appeared younger, his ears too large for his head. A loom occupied one corner of the living room. Beside it sat baskets of folded yarn arranged by color. Near the windows, a long oak desk held a ledger, sharpened pencils, and a calculator with oversized keys. Rhett had expected clutter. There was none. Even the mail on the side table had been divided into 3 neat stacks. Laurel examined Junot near the hearth while Evelyn kept one hand on his shoulder. The dog had mild irritation around one front ankle from the chain and stiffness from cold exposure, but no serious injury. "He was fed recently," Laurel said. "His coat is healthy. Whoever left him there did not have him long." "They took him Tuesday night." Evelyn's voice had changed. It was flatter now, built for facts. "How do you know the time?" Dana asked. "I let him into the yard at 9:15. I checked the back door at 9:30 because he had not scratched to come in. He was gone." "Was the gate open?" "Locked." Evelyn led them through the kitchen to a side window overlooking the yard. The fence ran behind the greenhouse and disappeared toward a line of spruce. "One panel near the tool shed looked wrong yesterday morning," she said. The lower hinge had fresh marks. Dana asked permission to photograph the fence. Evelyn gave it, then turned to Rhett. "You are quiet." "I am listening." Her expression suggested she had not yet decided whether that was a virtue. They went outside briefly. Snow had softened most tracks, but Dana found tool marks around the hinge and photographed them. One screw was newer than the others. Whoever removed the panel had put it back in place afterward. Inside again, Evelyn poured coffee without asking whether anyone wanted it. She set 4 mugs on the table and 1 bowl of water near Junot. He drank, then lay across the kitchen doorway, not blocking it, guarding the shape of the room. Dana placed a clear evidence sleeve containing a copy of the note on the table. "Have you seen the code WL17 before?" Evelyn looked at it for a long time. Then she went to the oak desk and opened a drawer. From inside, she removed a stack of envelopes bound with a red elastic band. The top page bore the logo of Quiet Ledger Services. "I have 17, she said. Dana's eyes lifted. 17 what? Letters, notices, revised notices, courtesy warnings that were not courteous. She brought the stack to the table and placed it beside the evidence sleeve. The small printed code in the upper corner of several pages read, Wren Lake 17. The room became quieter, not because the mystery was solved, because the threat had gained a grammar. Evelyn sat down. Quiet Ledger called the first time in October. They said they were reviewing a roofing account that had been transferred after the original contractor dissolved. Did you borrow money for the roof? Dana asked. Yes, 3 years ago. Fixed interest, automatic payment. I never missed one. She said it with the precise offense of someone whose competence had been questioned. Rhett glanced toward the desk. The ledgers were ruled by hand. Each page had dates, amounts, and initials. Evelyn had not survived 30 years of retail bookkeeping by guessing. What changed? Laurel asked. They claimed there were administrative charges not included in the original schedule. Then inspection fees. Then a penalty because I failed to respond to an electronic notice. Do you use email? I have email. That is not the same as wanting my roof hidden inside it. Dana almost smiled. Evelyn did not. They began discussing my property value. Then North Vale contacted me. She nodded toward the windows facing the lake. They want this land for Silver Hearth Retreat, walking trails, private cottages, a wellness center with stones in the lobby, and tea nobody actually enjoys. The humor came dry and unexpected. Rhett looked at her more closely. North Vale had offered to buy the property below market value, settle the disputed roof balance, and allow Evelyn to remain for 6 months. A representative had promised to help her find housing afterward. Pet-friendly housing? Laurel asked. They used that phrase. Was Junot guaranteed a place? Evelyn reached for another folder. No. She slid the contract across the table. The pages were thick, professionally printed, and filled with language that made concerns sound expensive. Rhett read the paragraph Evelyn indicated. Animal accommodation assistance may be offered subject to availability, health review, liability assessment, and applicable facility policies. That guarantees nothing, he said. I know that now. The sharpness in her answer stopped him. Evelyn stood and carried her mug to the sink, though it was still half full. They also sent someone to inspect the heating system. He said the furnace was old enough to raise questions about whether I could safely remain here. Then the woman from Quiet Ledger mentioned financial guardianship. Dana's pen stopped moving. Exactly what did she say? That sometimes independent seniors resisted necessary assistance until a preventable crisis occurred. She said a property review could protect me from being judged unable to manage my affairs. Rhett felt the muscles in his jaw tighten. It was not a direct threat. That made it worse. The language had been built to pass through a recording without admitting what it meant. Evelyn turned from the sink. My husband, Harold, became ill before he died. Not all at once. First, he forgot appointments, then invoices. Then one afternoon, he drove to a town where we had not lived in 20 years. Her hand rested on the counter. The court required an evaluation before I could take over the business accounts. A stranger asked me whether I knew what month it was. Another asked if I could make change from $20. They spoke slowly, as if age were contagious. Junot rose and crossed to her. He pressed his side against her legs. Evelyn's breathing, which Rhett had not noticed quickening, began to slow. He used to do that for Harold, Laurel said quietly, when Harold became frightened. Junot touched his nose to Evelyn's hand. Rhett watched the movement. The dog was not performing obedience. He was remembering love as a task. Something shifted in the room then. Not evidence, not danger. The relationship between Evelyn and Junot suddenly became visible in full. She had cared for him, but he had also helped hold together the last difficult years of her marriage. Taking him had not been random leverage. Someone had chosen the exact place where fear lived. Rhett stood. We should call your bank now. The words came out in the tone he used when a plow chain snapped or a road became unsafe. Direct. Final. Built to move people quickly. I can speak to the fraud department. We can stop the payments, freeze the account, and... No. Evelyn's voice was not loud. It did not need to be. Rhett paused. You should not wait. And you should not use that voice in my kitchen. Dana looked down at her notebook. Laurel busied herself with closing a medical pouch. Junot moved away from Evelyn and came to Rhett. He pressed his shoulder against Rhett's knee. The contact was firm enough to interrupt him, gentle enough to leave him a choice. Rhett looked down. Junot's amber eyes remained steady. Rhett became aware of his own posture, shoulders forward, hands braced on the table, body positioned as if the room required command. He stepped back. Evelyn folded her arms. North Vale has spent months telling me what is best for me. Quiet Ledger has explained my age, my furnace, my dog, and my future as if I were not present for any of them. I was trying to help. That is what all of them say first. The words landed cleanly. Rhett did not defend himself. The instinct was there. He could explain urgency, risk, and procedure. He could point out that people sometimes needed action before they were ready to ask for it. He had used those arguments before. Celeste had heard every version. Rhett lowered his hands. What do you want to happen first? Evelyn studied him. For the first time since they arrived, some of the hostility left her face. Not trust, recognition perhaps. The recognition of a man who had nearly crossed a line and noticed before being forced back. She went to a cabinet above the refrigerator and removed an old round cookie tin decorated with faded red cardinals. Inside were envelopes, receipts, notes from phone calls, and copies of contracts. Every paper had a date written in the upper right corner. I want to know what I signed, Evelyn said. She placed the tin in front of him. Not so you can rescue me. Rhett nodded. So I can decide what I do next. Dana opened her notebook again. That, she said, we can work with. They spent another hour making copies at Evelyn's desk. Dana took photographs of the originals, but left every document in Evelyn's possession. Laurel wrote a short medical statement confirming Junot's condition and long-term care history. Rhett did not touch the phone. Before leaving, Dana explained that she could open a preliminary case concerning the taking of Junot, the chain, and the written threat. But the note alone did not prove North Vale or Quiet Ledger had ordered anything. Keep every voicemail, she said. Do not delete email. Do not meet anyone alone, and do not sign new papers without independent review. Evelyn gave a small, humorless smile. I believe I have developed a temporary dislike of pens. Junot remained beside her as the others put on their coats. Rhett carried a box of copies to the truck. The originals stayed inside the house. At the end of the walk, he turned. Junot stood on the porch next to Evelyn, one ear straight, the other tipped outward. Snowlight caught the narrow gold streak on his nose. The dog did not whine or try to follow. He simply watched Rhett. It was a different look from the one at the timber scale. There was no plea in it now, no calculation about escape, only attention. Rhett lifted one gloved hand, then lowered it. Evelyn rested her fingers on Junot's collar. He remembers people, she said. I noticed. He remembers what they make him feel too. Rhett looked at the box on the passenger seat, heavy with copied warnings, contracts, and years of careful records. Then he looked back at Junot. The dog held his gaze as the engine started. Rhett drove away from Renwater Lake with no promise made, no problem solved, and no authority granted. Strangely, it felt more honest than rescue. Margaret Foley still kept a postal map of Frost Lantern on her kitchen wall. The paper had yellowed at the folds, and several roads no longer carried the names printed beside them. New owners had replaced old families. Barns had become rental cabins. 2 bridges had washed out and been rebuilt farther upstream. Yet Margaret could still point to almost any house in town and tell Rhett, who had once waited there for medicine, pension checks, seed catalogs, condolence cards, or letters from sons who had learned to make fear sound ordinary. Her house stood a block behind St. Brigid's Church, painted mustard yellow with white trim. Bird feeders crowded the porch rail. Chickadees argued over sunflower seeds while snow slipped from the roof in soft, heavy folds. Margaret opened the door before Rhett knocked. "You're late. It is 9 in the morning. You have been late since 1998. She was 68, short and broad through the shoulders, with steel-gray hair cut in a blunt bob beneath a navy wool cap. Square blue glasses made her dark eyes look even more attentive. She wore an old postal coat with the official patches removed, a brick-red sweater, and black winter trousers tucked into low snow boots. A red pencil rested behind one ear. Rhett held up the box of copied documents from Evelyn's house. "I brought paperwork." Margaret stepped aside. "Then come in before it breeds." Her kitchen smelled of coffee, toast, and the citrus oil she used on the wooden table. A canvas mail satchel hung from the back of a chair. Beside it sat 3 grocery bags labeled with names and addresses, ready for the volunteer route she ran through St. Brigid. Rhett placed Evelyn's box on the table. Margaret did not open it. "Does she know you brought these?" "They are copies. She gave permission." "Good. You thought I stole them?" "I thought you were a man with a strong back and an urgent expression. That combination has caused trouble before." Rhett pulled out a chair. Margaret sat opposite him and put on a second pair of reading glasses over the first. Rhett watched her stack them, waiting for the joke. She did not make one. The first envelope came from Quiet Ledger Services. Margaret turned it over, examined the return block, then held it near the window. This did not come from their Vermont office. They have one? They rent a desk in Montpelier twice a week. Their mail goes through a commercial processing center in New Hampshire. How do you know that? I can read. Rhett gave her a look. Margaret tapped the small code printed beside the bar marks. Bulk Processing Identifier. Same center used by catalog companies, debt services, and anyone who prefers their letters to look local when they are not. She opened another copy, then another. Her humor faded. These are supposed to be from different entities. One says Building Review, one says Account Administration, another says Property Transition Services. They use the same envelope stock. Rhett leaned closer. The paper looked ordinary to him. Margaret ran one finger over the lower edge. Same narrow cream strip where the cutting blade is dull. Same printer shadow near the postage mark. And this, she pointed to Evelyn's name. Every address listed her as Evelyn H. Harrow, with an unnecessary period after the middle initial and 2 spaces before Vermont. It could be a shared mailing company, Rhett said. It could. Margaret gathered the letters into a neat pile. That is why we do not announce a conspiracy before breakfast. She removed the red pencil from behind her ear and wrote 3 observations on a pad. Rhett felt his own impatience rise. He had expected recognition, perhaps a name, something that would turn Evelyn's fear into a direction. Margaret looked up. Disappointed? No. You make disappointment look like you are considering an axe. I do not own an axe that small. There, a joke. Winter is improving you. She carried the coffee pot to the table. After retiring, Margaret had begun delivering prescriptions and groceries to people along her former route during snowstorms. The church called it the Lantern Line. Margaret called it what happened when neighbors stopped pretending a phone number was the same as company. People show me letters, she said. Not because I ask. Because half of these notices are written as if confusion were a fee they can collect. How many people? I do not know yet. You remember who received them? Margaret's eyes hardened behind the doubled glasses. I remember houses. I do not keep a private catalog of other people's mail. Rhett heard the correction beneath the words. Margaret had spent 37 years carrying sealed envelopes without confusing proximity with permission. If they were going to build a case, it would not begin by violating the people they meant to help. "So we ask," he said. "Yes." "Everyone?" "Everyone who chooses to answer." They began with Warren Pike. His workshop stood behind a white farmhouse on the northern edge of town, where snow had collected against the windows almost halfway to the sill. A carved wooden sign above the door read, "Pike Stringed Instruments," though the last S had cracked down the middle. Warren was 81 and shaped like a question mark that refused to fall over. His shoulders had bent from years at a workbench, but his hands remained broad and steady. Silver hair floated around his head as if static lived there permanently. He wore a green wool vest over a checked shirt and magnifying lenses clipped to his glasses. He did not invite them in at first. "I already signed," he said through the half-open door. "Nothing to discuss." Margaret held up both hands. "We are not here to reverse your life by force." "That is a creative way of saying you think I made a mistake." Rhett glanced past him. Inside the workshop, violin bodies hung from hooks beneath warm lamps. Wood shavings curled across the floor. A half-finished cello rested on padded supports, its pale maple surface glowing against the darker room. Junot arrived with Evelyn a few minutes later. Evelyn had insisted on coming, saying that if others were expected to speak about embarrassing paperwork, she would not remain comfortably at home while they did it. Junot wore a burgundy winter coat with gray, reflective trim. He greeted no one. He simply entered after Warren gave permission and lay near the stove. Warren watched him. "That the dog from the scale?" "Yes," Evelyn said. "You all brought a dog to make me confess?" "No," Margaret said. "We brought Rhett for that. The dog improves the room." Warren almost smiled. Almost was enough to get them inside. He placed his sale contract on the workbench, but kept one hand over it. The document showed that Warren had agreed to sell both the workshop and surrounding land to a North Vale holding company. The price was less than half the assessed value. "You knew the price was low," Rhett said. Warren's eyes sharpened. "I can still count." Rhett recognized the injury immediately. It was the same one he had caused Evelyn, turning concern into an accusation of incompetence. He tried again. "Why did the number become acceptable?" Warren looked toward the unfinished cello. His wife had died 11 months earlier after a long illness. Bills had arrived from 3 providers, 2 insurers, and a collections contractor. One letter warned that unresolved debt could affect the title to the property. "I called the number," Warren said. "They told me the debt might become a claim against the estate." "Your wife's estate?" Margaret asked. "Or mine. They were not particular about pronouns." He had a niece in Burlington who called every Sunday and had offered to help. Warren refused. "She has a job, a house, her own worries. I was not going to turn old age into her second occupation." Junot rose, crossed the room, and rested his head on Warren's boot. The old man went silent. He did not pet the dog, not at first. Then one hand moved from the contract and settled between Junot's ears. The gesture altered the room more than any confession might have. Warren's voice softened. "I signed because selling badly seemed kinder than needing loudly." No one answered for several seconds. Rhett looked at the hanging instruments. Every one of them had been built to make sound. Yet Warren had accepted less than the land was worth because asking for help felt more shameful than disappearing from it. The pattern was not fraud alone. It was isolation converted into leverage. Their next stop was Loretta Ames's greenhouse. The structure rose behind her farmhouse like a glass ship stranded in snow. Condensation fogged the panes. Inside, rows of herbs and wintergreens grew under yellow lamps. The warmth smelled of wet soil, rosemary, and metal pipes. Loretta was 76, narrow-faced and energetic, with white hair twisted into a loose knot and dirt under her fingernails. She wore denim overalls beneath a red cardigan and moved between plant tables with the speed of someone who considered chairs a poor use of floor space. Her old orange cat, Cider, slept inside a fleece-lined crate near the heater. Loretta produced an inspection report stating that her greenhouse furnace posed an immediate risk of carbon monoxide failure. The report recommended a replacement system costing more than $20,000. Quiet Ledger had arranged financing, and North Vale had offered to buy the property if she could not afford the work. Rhett studied the attached photograph. The furnace in the image had a rusted side panel and a black vent pipe. Loretta's furnace was blue with a silver vent. "That is not yours," he said. "I said the same thing." What did they say? That the photograph was representative. Margaret pushed her glasses higher. Representative of what? Apparently financial ruin. Loretta had not signed the sale agreement, but she had accepted a preliminary loan. The interest rate doubled if the property transfer did not proceed within 90 days. She had also been promised that Cider could move with her to the Silver Hearth Senior Cottages. "Is that in writing?" Evelyn asked. Loretta looked toward the cat. No. The single word carried more shame than anger. Evelyn reached across the potting table and touched her wrist. They did the same thing with Junot. Loretta met her eyes. The two women did not comfort each other. They did something more useful. They compared documents. By late afternoon, Margaret's kitchen table had disappeared beneath copies contributed voluntarily by 6 households. Not all involved North Vale directly. Some began with roof repairs, furnace evaluations, or insurance notices. But the paper, mailing codes, and language repeated. Margaret created a chart. Rhett expected names and dates. Instead, she drew 3 columns. Owns land clearly, lives alone, Renwater access corridor. Every household fit at least 2, most fit all 3. She laid an old planning map beside the chart. A shaded line ran from the proposed Silver Hearth site toward the lake, crossing the Harrow property, Warren's workshop, Loretta's greenhouse, and 3 smaller parcels. "They are not choosing people because they are old," Rhett said. "Not only because they are old," Margaret corrected. "They are choosing useful land with owners they believe can be separated from advice." Rhett looked at the map. The letters were not random pressure. They formed a road before North Vale had built one. St. Bridget's Church stood at the center of town, beneath a narrow white steeple. Reverend Thomas Avery met them in the basement that evening. He was 63, slender and slightly stooped, with a high forehead and thinning white hair combed back. A brown cardigan softened the severity of his clerical collar. He carried a mug that read, "Coffee is a spiritual test." Rhett took one sip from the communal pot and decided the mug was a confession. Thomas listened as Margaret explained the pattern. "I have seen some of these letters," he said. "You read parishioners' mail?" Rhett asked. "They brought it to me, usually folded inside prayer requests." He looked toward the empty tables in the basement. They asked God for clarity because asking a lawyer felt expensive. Thomas had worked in housing services before entering ministry. He understood enough to know the documents required professional review and enough to know he should not provide it himself. He called Naomi Calder, a legal aid attorney who ran a mobile clinic through rural Vermont counties. Thomas put the phone on speaker. Naomi's voice was composed and brisk. "I can come Friday with a paralegal and 1 volunteer attorney. Before then, make copies only with written permission. Keep originals with the owners. Do not make accusations publicly." "We have repeated mail codes, false inspection photographs, and coordinated property offers," Rhett said. "You may have predatory conduct," Naomi replied. "You may have deceptive business practices. You may also have several legal contracts that are deeply unfair. What is the difference? The difference is what a court can prove. The answer irritated Rhett because it was careful. Careful answers were rarely satisfying. They were also harder to destroy. Naomi continued. An unfair agreement is not automatically an illegal one. Do not promise anyone we can erase a signature. Warren looked down at his hands. Evelyn sat straighter. No one is asking you to erase us, she said. We are asking you to tell us what the ink means. The room became still. Naomi's tone changed, not softer but more attentive. That I can promise. Across town, Dana Bell spent the same evening in a metal-sided office behind the county vehicle yard. Gavin Rusk sat opposite her beneath fluorescent lights. At 56, Gavin had the heavy shoulders and sloped posture of a man who spent his days lifting unwilling animals into transport cages. His brown-gray hair had receded beneath a faded company cap. A large ring of vehicle keys hung from his belt. He kept twisting the cap's brim between his fingers. Dana placed a printed map on the table. You said you never transported Junot. I said I never stole him. That was not my question. Gavin looked toward the closed door. Dana set down another page. Location data from his work phone showed his truck near Renwater on Tuesday night, then at the abandoned timber scale shortly before Rhett's call. Gavin's mouth tightened. I had a pickup order. From whom? A private client. For what destination? A temporary holding facility. Which one? I do not remember. Dana waited. Silence had weight in an interview room. She knew how to let a person carry it without rescuing them. Gavin's fingers crushed the brim of his cap. I did not hurt the dog. That is not the same as saying you did not take him. He looked at the map again. Fear moved through his face before he lowered his eyes. Not fear of arrest alone. Something more practical. Debt, perhaps. Employment. A person who knew where his truck slept at night. I delivered what I was paid to deliver, he said. But Junot was not delivered. Gavin said nothing. Dana leaned back. You left him at the scale. His head lifted sharply. The reaction was answer enough. Dana closed the folder. Gavin was not ready to tell the truth, but he was no longer successfully hiding where it lived. Outside, snow began falling again over the county yard, softening the tracks around his transport truck. Dana watched him through the office window as an officer escorted him out. Gavin paused beside the vehicle and looked into the empty cage in the back. Then he locked it twice. The basement of St. Bridget's had never been designed for law. Its ceiling pipes ticked whenever the furnace woke. Folding tables leaned slightly toward the floor drain. A faded mural of Noah's Ark stretched across one wall, painted years ago by volunteers who had given every animal the same cheerful expression, including the lions. By 9 on Friday morning, the room had become a temporary legal clinic. Margaret placed handwritten signs near the stairs. Originals stay with owners. Copies go in blue folders. Coffee is not evidence. Reverend Thomas Avery objected only to the last sign. My coffee has established several facts, he said. Mostly about suffering, Margaret replied. Rhett carried another table from the storage room, while Evelyn arranged chairs in a wide semicircle rather than a straight row. She said people should not have to sit as if awaiting judgment. Junot settled beside the radiator, his burgundy winter coat folded beneath him like a mat. Warren Pike arrived with his sale agreement inside a violin case. Loretta Ames brought 3 folders, 2 thermoses, and Cider's veterinary records, though no one had asked for the last item. She said promises about an animal ought to be examined, alongside proof that the animal existed. At 10 minutes past 9, Naomi Calder came down the stairs carrying a cognac-colored legal bag and an expression that suggested she had already read 3 disappointing emails before breakfast. She was 46, tall and composed, with naturally curled black hair tied low at the nape of her neck. A camel wool blazer showed beneath her navy winter coat. She moved without hurry, but every object she touched seemed to acquire a place and a purpose. Behind her came Mara Ellis, a certified paralegal in her early 50s, with close-cropped gray hair, bright green glasses, and a wheeled case full of scanners, extension cords, and labeled envelopes. The third member of the team was Daniel Cho, a 38-year-old housing attorney volunteering through Vermont Legal Aid. Daniel was compact, soft-spoken, and dressed in a charcoal suit with snow boots that looked newly purchased and deeply resented. Naomi removed her gloves. "Before we begin, I need everyone to understand what today is not." Thomas quietly moved the coffee farther from the files. "This is not a promise that every contract can be canceled. It is not a criminal investigation. It is not permission to contact the press, post accusations online, or confront company representatives." Rhett stopped unfolding a chair. Naomi noticed. "It is a review," she continued. "We determine what was signed, what was disclosed, what was promised, and whether any legal deadlines remain open." Warren rested both hands on the violin case. "And if we sign something foolish?" Naomi met his eyes. "Then we use the word signed before we use the word foolish." Something in Warren's shoulders eased. The room divided into stations. Mara scanned documents and logged where each copy came from. Daniel reviewed property transfers and repair loans. Naomi moved from table to table, asking questions that sounded simple until people tried to answer them precisely. "Who contacted you first? What exact words were used? Was anyone else present? Did you receive the document before signing? Were you told to consult an attorney? Did the written agreement include what had been promised aloud?" Rhett watched the process with growing frustration. He had expected the repeated mailing codes, false furnace photograph, and connection to North Vale to make the solution obvious. Instead, Naomi kept separating one document from another, refusing to let suspicion do the work of proof. Around noon, she called everyone together. "The signatures are authentic," she said. No one spoke. She placed Warren's contract on the table, then Loretta's loan agreement and 2 documents belonging to other landowners. These people signed voluntarily in the narrow legal sense. They were not physically forced. Most received copies. Several accepted deposits or services. Warren looked at the floor. Margaret's red pencil stopped moving. Rhett felt anger rise with almost embarrassing speed. "So that is it?" Naomi turned toward him. "No." "You just said the signatures hold." "I said they are real. Real and enforceable are not the same question." "Enforceable and fair are not the same question either." "Then cancel them." Daniel looked down at his notes. Naomi did not. "Law is not a snowbank, Mr. Donovan. You cannot lower a blade and push the whole problem into a ditch." Rhett crossed his arms. People were threatened. Some were pressured, some were misled. We may be able to prove deceptive practices or improper debt activity, but if we announce fraud before we can support it, North Vale could accelerate closing dates, challenge the owner's credibility, or file defamation claims. They took Evelyn's dog, and Lieutenant Bell is investigating that separately. The distinction felt artificial to Rhett. The dog, the letters, the debts, and the land formed one thing in his mind. Naomi treated them like pieces that could fail if joined too early. Evelyn spoke from the end of the table. "She is not saying nothing happened." "No," Naomi said. "I am saying what happened may be more difficult to name than theft." Warren opened the violin case. Instead of an instrument, it contained his paperwork, arranged beneath a dark velvet cloth. "I knew the price was low," he said. No one interrupted. "I had 3 valuations. I understood the difference. I signed anyway." Rhett remembered Warren's words in the workshop, but hearing them in front of the group changed their weight. Warren ran one thumb along the worn handle of the case. "My niece offered to help with the medical bills. She would have. She is a good woman. But her husband was between jobs, and they had already converted their dining room into an office because there was no other space." "You did not tell her the full amount," Margaret said. "No? Why?" "Because every person who loves an old man eventually begins rearranging a room for him." His attempt at humor collapsed before it reached anyone. "I thought if I sold quickly, I could move somewhere small before she had to ask. I did not misunderstand the contract. I misunderstood what I was allowed to need." Junot lifted his head from the radiator. The room remained still. That was the moment the case changed. Not in law, perhaps. Not yet. But the people at the tables stopped looking like victims, fooled by clever paper. They became adults who had made choices inside conditions designed to make only one choice feel decent. Loretta opened her own folder. "I signed the furnace loan," she said. "They told me the cottages accepted pets." "Did they say Cider by name?" Naomi asked. "Yes. A woman named Pauline asked his age and whether he needed medication." "Is that written anywhere?" "No." Loretta's mouth tightened. She said there was no reason to burden the contract with details that could be handled personally. Daniel wrote the phrase down. "Did you rely on that promise when you signed?" "I would not have signed without it." Naomi nodded once. "That matters." Evelyn had remained quiet through most of the morning. Now she reached into her blue folder and removed an unsigned purchase agreement. "I came close," she said. Rhett looked at her. She had never told him that. "The pen was in my hand. The North Vale representative had already marked where I should initial." Junot stood and moved beside her chair. Evelyn touched the thick fur at his neck. "I did not believe their wellness center would save me. I did not even like the brochure." Everyone in it was smiling at Soup. A few people laughed softly. Evelyn did not. "I imagined falling in the greenhouse. I imagined lying there until Junot became hungry enough to leave me. Then I imagined animal control, taking him somewhere with a number instead of his name." Her fingers tightened in his fur. "I nearly signed because I wanted to decide what happened to him before illness decided for me." Rhett understood then why North Vale's language worked. It did not create fear from nothing. It entered fears already living in the house and offered them paperwork. Naomi began drawing lines across a whiteboard. Quiet Ledger had arranged repair financing, administrative fees, and property reviews. North Vale appeared later with purchase offers that could resolve the newly created financial pressure. Separate companies appeared on the paperwork, but several shared addresses, representatives, or referral numbers. "Each act may be lawful when viewed alone," Naomi said. "A roof loan can be legal, a property offer can be legal, a debt notice can be legal, but coordination matters. Misrepresentation matters. Undisclosed relationships matter." She circled 3 phrases: unlicensed debt activity, deceptive oral promises, coordinated pressure. Rhett looked at the board. "Then we tell the newspaper what we found." Naomi capped the marker. "No. They are still contacting people. And public accusations could make them move faster. Silence helps them. Careless speech can help them too." Rhett walked away before his voice rose. He went upstairs, stood in the church vestibule, and called the customer service number printed on Evelyn's roofing notice. He told himself he only wanted the dispute procedure. The representative transferred him twice, then offered to schedule a financial account review at the Harrow property. Rhett gave Evelyn's name, address, and the account reference from her copy. The appointment was set for Monday morning. Only after the call ended did he understand what he had done. He had not accessed her account. He had not received private information. He had still placed a stranger on her calendar without asking. When Rhett returned downstairs, Evelyn was holding his handwritten note from the call. Mara had found it beside the copy machine. "What is this?" Evelyn asked. Rhett stopped. "I called the service number." "I can see that." "I set up a review. They can explain the account, and—" "You invited them to my house?" "It is a bank contractor, not North Vale." "You do not know that." The room fell silent. Rhett felt every face turned toward him. His first instinct was to explain. The appointment could be canceled. He had moved quickly because Monday was close. Someone needed to keep the account from advancing. All true. None of it answered the real charge. Evelyn stood. "You asked what I wanted in my kitchen." "I remember." "Apparently only until you disagreed with the speed of it." "I was trying to keep them from taking control of my property?" Her voice sharpened. "By taking control of my property?" Junot moved between the tables. He did not place himself in front of Evelyn this time. He came directly to Rhett and pressed his side against Rhett's leg. Firm pressure, warmth through canvas trousers, an interruption without humiliation. Rhett looked down at the dog. His hands had curled into fists without his noticing. He opened them. Then he sat. The movement surprised everyone, including Rhett. "I was wrong," he said. The words sounded bare in the large basement. No explanation followed. He took out his phone, called the number again, and canceled the appointment while Evelyn listened. He asked the representative to note that no further visit should be scheduled without direct authorization from the account holder. When the call ended, Rhett placed the phone face down. "I am sorry." Evelyn studied him for several seconds. "Do not apologize because the room is watching." "I am not." "Then why?" Rhett rested his forearms on his knees. The honest answer had sharp edges. "Because I used to do this to Celeste." No one moved. "My wife would tell me she was afraid or angry, and I would make a plan. I found solutions before she finished speaking. If she asked what happened during the war, I said I was protecting her by not answering." His throat tightened, but he continued. "I treated silence like a wall I could stand behind while calling it shelter." Evelyn sat down slowly. Rhett looked at the floor. Eventually she stopped asking. "I thought that meant the wall worked." "What did it mean?" Warren asked. "That she had learned there was no door." The basement furnace started with a low metallic breath. Junot remained beside Rhett, no longer pressing against him. Evelyn's anger did not vanish. It changed shape. "Silence does not protect people from pain," she said. "It leaves them alone with a pain they cannot name." Rhett lifted his eyes. She was not forgiving him. She was giving him the truth instead. That was more useful. Naomi returned to the whiteboard. "We need a different structure," she said. "No one here acts on another owner's behalf without written permission. Not Rhett, not the church, not me." She began listing the next steps. They would document every oral promise and identify witnesses. They would compare inspection reports for repeated images and language. Naomi would examine whether Quiet Ledger was performing debt adjustment or collection work without the required authority. Formal dispute notices would go to escrow agents, lenders, and title insurers. Daniel would draft preservation letters requiring relevant companies to retain call logs, contracts, and internal communications. Each owner would decide which action to authorize. No one would be pushed into fighting. No one would be pushed into settling. The group spent the remainder of the afternoon creating individual instruction sheets. At the top of each page, Naomi added one question: "What outcome do you want?" Warren wrote that he wanted time to speak honestly with his niece before deciding whether to keep the workshop. Loretta wanted the furnace loan suspended and the pet promise documented. Evelyn wrote 3 lines in blue ink. I want to understand the debt. I want Junot protected. I want the choice to remain mine. Rhett read none of the sheets unless someone handed one to him. When the clinic ended, he stacked chairs while Evelyn gathered her folders. Junot waited beside her. At the stairs, Evelyn stopped. You canceled the appointment. Yes. That does not make the first call acceptable. I know. She adjusted the strap of her document bag. Good. Then she handed him a sealed envelope addressed to the title company. You can drive this to Montpelier tomorrow. Rhett accepted it. Do you want me to read it? No. Do you want a receipt? Yes. A small task, a clear boundary. Trust did not return as forgiveness or gratitude. It returned as an instruction given freely. Rhett placed the envelope inside his coat. Behind them, Naomi erased the whiteboard, except for the question at the top. What outcome do you want? The people of Frost Lantern had begun the week asking who could save them. By Friday evening, they were learning to ask something harder. What did they choose? For 1 week, the basement of St. Bridget's stopped resembling a church room and began resembling a place where paper went to confess. Folders covered the tables. Extension cords crossed the floor beneath strips of yellow tape. Margaret Foley worked through lists with her red pencil while Mara Ellis scanned contracts into numbered files. Daniel Cho compared signatures, disclosures, and cancellation dates. Naomi Calder spent hours on the telephone with title companies, lenders, and state offices, speaking in the patient, exact tone of someone building a bridge 1 legal plank at a time. Rhett's work was less elegant. He drove. He carried Warren Pike through a morning when the old man's knees refused the church steps. He brought Loretta Ames and 3 boxes of documents from her greenhouse. He picked up prescription refills, moved folding tables, and cleared snow from the side entrance before dawn. No one called it legal work. That was partly why he trusted it. Each task came with a clear instruction. Pick up at 9, do not open the folder, get a receipt, call before arriving. Rhett had discovered that boundaries were not walls. They were more like road markers in a whiteout, small signs that allowed a person to keep moving without taking over the whole landscape. By Thursday, Dr. Laurel Keene had added veterinary records to the evidence. She stood at the end of the long table in her red-brown barn coat, short ash-blonde hair still damp from snow, and spread 3 animal risk assessments beneath the desk lamp. The first described Junot as a large shepherd with persistent territorial aggression, unpredictable barrier response, and elevated liability exposure. The second used the same language for an 11-year-old Labrador with arthritis. The third applied it to Loretta's orange cat, Cider. Thomas Avery adjusted his glasses. The cat has territorial aggression? Loretta folded her arms. Only against lamps, ribbon, and organized religion before breakfast. Laurel tapped the reports. Same wording, same punctuation error, same recommendation for off-site transitional holding. Rhett looked at Junot, who lay beneath Evelyn's chair with his head on his paws. The phrase off-site transitional holding had the clean, bloodless sound of bureaucracy. It did not say, taking a dog. It did not say, separating an animal from the only person who knew how it slept, what frightened it, or which name made its ears lift. It simply made disappearance sound professional. Further review uncovered repeated furnace photographs, repair invoices issued by companies registered at the same commercial address as Quiet Ledger, and internal call notes copied into several account files. One line appeared more than once. Pet retention may be used to maintain cooperation during transition. Margaret read it aloud, then removed her glasses. They wrote animals as if they were refundable deposits. Naomi did not answer immediately. She placed the page inside a protective sleeve. That sentence matters, she said. but we still establish who wrote it, who received it, and whether it guided actual conduct." Rhett knew she was right. He also hated how often truth required permission before it could become useful. On Friday afternoon, Dana Bell called from the county office. Gavin Rusk had asked to amend his statement. He arrived wearing the same faded company cap and dark blue work jacket, though without the large ring of transport keys usually hanging from his belt. Dana had taken those into evidence. Gavin sat across from her, shoulders sloped, both hands wrapped around a paper cup he had not touched. "I was given a pickup order," he said. "By whom?" Gavin looked toward the recording device. "A site services manager named Lowell Brackett. He handles Northvale property clearances and contractor access." "What were you told about Junot?" "That the owner had agreed to temporary placement during a financial review." "Did you verify that with Evelyn Harrow?" "No." "Did you enter her property?" Gavin closed his eyes briefly. "Brackett had the fence panel opened before I arrived." Dana let the answer remain in the room. Gavin continued. Junot had resisted the transport crate, but had not bitten anyone. At the storage yard outside town, Gavin found the plastic pouch and read the threat inside. He realized the paperwork did not describe a lawful surrender. "Why not call the police?" Dana asked. "Because I owed Quiet Ledger $26,000. The debt came from a business loan Gavin had taken after 2 transport vans failed in the same winter. Quiet Ledger had purchased the account, added penalties, and offered to suspend collection if he performed contract work. "So, you took the dog," Dana said. "Yes." "And then?" "I knew Donovan's plow route passed the old scale after midnight, most nights." "You left a living animal outside at 10 below zero." Gavin stared into the coffee. "I put him where someone might see him." "That is not the same as putting him somewhere safe." "No." There was no defense in the answer, only a man finally refusing himself the comfort of one. Gavin surrendered his route schedules, messages from Brackett, and proof of payment. He agreed to identify the storage facility and cooperate with a formal investigation. Dana made no promise about charges. A late truth did not erase an earlier choice, but it opened a door evidence could pass through. Saturday arrived bright, bitter, and almost festive enough to make the week's work seem imaginary. The Silver Hearth Winter Festival filled the Frost Lantern Square from the church steps to Town Hall. Paper lanterns hung between buildings beneath strings of white lights. Horse-drawn sleighs circled the fountain. Vendors sold maple candy, wool mittens, and hot cider under striped canopies. Children were absent from the story of Frost Lantern's land fight, but the square still belonged to adults performing cheerfulness with great discipline. A stage had been built before Town Hall beneath a wide banner, "Silver Hearth. Retreat a new season for Frost Lantern." Northvale representatives moved through the crowd in navy coats with silver logos stitched over the heart. Rhett disliked the placement. Everything about the festival was designed to look inevitable. The polished architectural renderings, the sample cottage with its artificial fire, the smiling photographs of gray-haired couples walking dogs beside a lake that looked suspiciously unlike Renwater. Near the stage, Councilwoman Maribel Crane studied a display board showing projected jobs and tax revenue. She was 55, solidly built and dressed in an ox-blood wool coat over black trousers. Her black hair, threaded with silver, fell to her shoulders in a clean, blunt line. A silver mountain pin rested on her lapel. She tapped the edge of a mustard-colored notebook with her pen while listening to a Northvale consultant describe seasonal employment. Maribel believed towns could die politely. First, the clinic reduced hours. Then the school bus stopped coming to the far roads. Then stores became dark windows with old sale signs. She had watched young adults leave Frost Lantern and return only for funerals. Silver Hearth promised jobs, road repairs, and a broader tax base. Those promises mattered. When Rhett approached with Naomi and Evelyn, Maribel closed the notebook. "I read the summary you sent," Naomi nodded. "And?" "And I see concerns. I also see allegations, partial records, and people asking this town to halt its largest investment proposal in 20 years. Evelyn's chin lifted. "We are asking the town not to build it with our houses." Maribel did not retreat. "Then show me where choice became coercion." That was why Rhett respected her, despite wanting to argue. She did not demand emotion. She demanded a structure strong enough to bear consequence. Silas Vane took the stage shortly after noon. He was tall, narrow, and carefully composed in a navy wool coat over a gray turtleneck. Silver had begun at his temples, precisely enough to look intentional. His pale green eyes moved across the crowd with practiced warmth. He spoke without notes. Silas described Frost Lantern as a town poised between inheritance and possibility. He promised 200 construction jobs, permanent hospitality work, and new partnerships for regional farms. He did not sound greedy. He sounded reasonable. That was the danger. Silas had grown up in a family that lost its land to unpaid taxes. He had built an entire philosophy around the belief that attachment was merely fear wearing a family name. In his world, places survived only by becoming useful to someone richer. After the speech, he crossed the square toward Thomas Avery. "Reverend," Silas said, extending a gloved hand, "North Vale would like to fund a senior transition program through St. Bridget's." Thomas did not take the hand immediately. What would the program provide? Relocation counseling, financial literacy, transportation support, assistance with pet placement. Evelyn's hand tightened on Junot's leash. Thomas finally shook Silas's hand, then released it. Would the funding continue if St. Bridget's also hosted independent legal review of North Vale contracts? Silas's smile remained. The church should decide whether its mission is pastoral support or political agitation. That was not my question. Around them, the festival continued. Sleigh bells passed along the opposite side of the square. A vendor shouted that cider was running low. Silas glanced toward Naomi. "We are concerned that frightened residents are being encouraged to interpret ordinary business processes as abuse." "Ordinary processes do not require identical animal risk reports for a shepherd, a Labrador, and a cat," Laurel said. Silas turned to her. "And you are?" "The veterinarian who knows all 3 animals." His smile arrived a fraction later than before. "Then I am sure you understand the limits of non-standard behavior assessments." "I understand copying." Maribel had moved closer. Rhett saw her pen stop above the notebook. Silas changed direction smoothly. "North Vale has no interest in separating anyone from a beloved animal. We are attempting to help aging residents transition safely before a crisis forces decisions upon them." Evelyn stepped forward. Junot moved with her. She did not raise her voice. That made the circle around them grow quieter. "If you are helping us choose," she asked, "why does every choice end with us leaving before spring?" Silas faced her. "Mrs. Harrow, responsible development requires coordinated timelines." "Your timeline?" "The project cannot remain uncertain because individual owners find change emotionally difficult." There it was, not a confession, something more revealing. Silas had reduced their lives to scheduling resistance. Evelyn looked toward the renderings of silver-roofed cottages. "My husband died in that house. I kept the books for our business at that desk. Junot knows where the floor creaks before the kitchen." Silas's expression remained composed. "Those memories deserve respect, but memory cannot become public policy." "No," Evelyn said. "Fear should not become private policy either." Maribel's eyes lifted from her notebook. Several people in the crowd had begun listening. Warren stood near a maple candy stall, holding his violin case. Loretta held Cider's carrier beneath one arm. Others from Margaret's old route gathered behind them, not as a crowd prepared for outrage, but as people recognizing the same sentence spoken in different rooms. Silas turned toward Maribel. "Councilwoman, this is exactly the kind of emotional escalation that threatens responsible investment." Maribel's pen began tapping again. "You were asked about coordinated choices," she said. "You answered with project efficiency." "Because efficiency protects the entire town." "Does it protect the owners?" Silas did not answer directly. He spoke instead about delayed closings, construction windows, and regional competition. Each sentence widened the distance between his language and the people standing before him. Naomi did not use the moment for a public accusation. She handed Maribel a concise evidence packet. Inside were the repeated animal assessments, the furnace image comparison, corporate registration links, excerpts from call notes, and an affidavit summarizing Gavin's revised statement without disclosing protected investigative details. "These are not conclusions," Naomi said. "They are grounds for review." Maribel opened the packet. "This morning," Naomi continued, "a title insurer placed holds on 3 pending transactions after receiving formal notices of disputed inducement. 2 owners exercised cancellation rights within applicable review periods. The Attorney General's Consumer Assistance Program has acknowledged receipt of the complaints." Silas's face did not change much, only the jaw. "You are interfering with valid contracts." "We are using valid procedures," Naomi replied. Rhett felt the crowd shifting, not toward spectacle, toward caution. North Vale's future had been presented as a train already moving. Naomi had shown that someone had found the brake, not enough to stop every carriage, but enough to make boarding a choice again. Near the edge of the square, Junot suddenly turned his head. A man in a black North Vale jacket stood beside the service tent. Rhett recognized him from a still image Dana had shared privately. Lowell Brackett, the contractor Gavin said, had arranged Junot's removal. Junot recognized something else. His body stiffened, the hair along his shoulders lifted slightly. He did not bark. Brackett glanced at the dog and stepped backward. Junot moved in front of Evelyn. He stood sideways across her path, broad chest steady, leash loose between them. One ear upright, the other tipped outward. No lunge, no exposed teeth, just position. Rhett moved closer, but stopped several feet away. The old part of him wanted to cross the square, seize Brackett, and force the afternoon into a clean answer. Instead, Rhett looked at Dana, who had already noticed. She approached Brackett with another deputy. Rhett stayed beside Evelyn. Junot did not leave his place. The man was questioned at the edge of the festival, quietly enough that the band continued playing near the fountain. No public arrest followed. Dana collected identification and instructed Brackett not to approach Evelyn or Junot while the investigation remained active. It was less satisfying than confrontation. It was also stronger. Evelyn rested her hand on Junot's back. "You saw him," she whispered. Junot continued watching until Brackett disappeared behind the county vehicle. Then he sat. Rhett looked down at him. For years, Rhett had believed protection meant reaching danger first, making himself larger than it, giving fear no room to negotiate. Junot had done something different. He had not chased the threat. He had made sure it could not pass. By late afternoon, the festival lights glowed against the blue winter dusk. Silver hearth banners still hung above the square. The stage still stood. North Vale had not vanished, and no one pretended the fight was over. But 3 land sales were paused. 2 owners had withdrawn in time. The state had opened a file, and Maribel Crane remained beside the maple stall long after Silas left, reading every page Naomi had given her. Rhett helped Evelyn into his truck for the ride home. Junot climbed in after her and settled across the floorboards, one paw resting on her boot. Before closing the door, Evelyn looked back at the shining square. They wanted us grateful for the right to disappear politely. Rhett followed her gaze. What do you want instead? Evelyn looked down at Junot. Time. Not victory, not revenge. Time to read, choose, speak, and remain. For the first time, Rhett understood that time itself could be a form of rescue. He closed the passenger door gently. Behind them, the silver hearth banner moved in the cold wind, still large enough to be seen from every street, but no longer large enough to hide everything beneath it. North Vale did not answer the festival with anger. It answered with inconvenience. 3 days after Silver Hearth, Margaret Foley received a 6-page letter accusing her of interfering with private contracts, distributing confidential business materials, and damaging the reputation of Quiet Ledger Services. The letter did not file a lawsuit. It merely described one in enough detail to make fear arrive early. A local social media account posted a photograph of Rhett beside Evelyn and Junot at the festival. The caption called him an unstable former serviceman who had been intimidating investors and manipulating elderly landowners. The photograph showed Rhett standing still. That was the useful thing about lies. They did not need the picture to agree with them. Then Miles Caldwell called. Rhett had known Miles for 26 years. They had repaired plow blades together, argued over hydraulic fluid, and once spent an entire February pretending not to notice that both of them were too tired to drive safely. Miles owned Caldwell Road Services, the company that subcontracted Rhett for private roads around Renwater. At 60, he had a wide body, a thick silver mustache, and the permanently wind-burnt face of a man who believed every mechanical failure could be improved by louder language. He asked Rhett to meet at the equipment yard. Snowplows stood in a row beneath gray morning light, yellow blades lowered like tired jaws. Miles waited beside the maintenance shed wearing a mustard safety coat and holding a steel coffee mug large enough to serve soup. "I need you off the Renwater routes for a while," he said. Rhett looked past him at the parked trucks. "For how long?" "Until this settles." "North Vale called you." Miles rubbed one thumb over the mug's lid. "They are a major account. So are the people living on those roads." "I know." "No, you know the invoice total." Miles's face tightened. "I have 14 employees. Some have mortgages. Some have kids in college." Rhett said nothing. That silence was different from the old kind. It did not hide. It waited. Miles looked away first. "They said your involvement creates a safety and liability issue. They threatened to move all site work to another contractor." "And you believed them?" "I believed they would do it." The honesty hurt more than an excuse would have. Miles told him the municipal route remained intact, but the private contracts accounted for most of Rhett's winter income. The suspension was unofficial, temporary, and devastating in exactly the way North Vale preferred. No court order. No arrest. Just a man being made expensive to stand beside. Rhett turned in his keys to the private route loader. Miles held out the receipt for him. "I am sorry." Rhett signed it. "Do not use that word unless you plan to pay for it." He left before Miles could answer. For 2 days, Rhett disappeared without technically going anywhere. He turned off his phone. He parked the plow beneath the lean-to and let snow gather on the hood. The Sugar Road house became silent except for the furnace, the refrigerator, and branches brushing the roof. His instinct was not to abandon the group. He told himself he was protecting them. The distinction had fooled him before. Evelyn called from the hospital on the second evening. Her heart rhythm had become irregular after weeks of poor sleep and stress. The doctors did not believe she was in immediate danger, but wanted to monitor her overnight. Laurel brought Junot to Rhett's house. "He cannot stay at the hospital," she said. Rhett looked at the dog standing beside her station wagon. Junot looked back. The choice had apparently already been made. "He is eating," Laurel continued. "He is not sick. He is frightened because Evelyn is gone." "So am I supposed to tell him she is coming back?" "You could begin by not pretending you are not home." Laurel handed him a canvas bag of food and medication instructions, though Junot needed no medicine. "Evelyn asked for you specifically." Rhett almost said she should have asked someone else. Instead, he took the bag. Junot entered the house slowly. He checked the kitchen, living room, and hallway. Then he returned to the front door, sniffed beneath it, and walked to the back entrance. After that came the garage door. He repeated the circuit 6 times. At midnight, Rhett found him standing in the dark kitchen facing the mudroom. "You already checked it." Junot glanced at him, then returned his attention to the door. Rhett carried the dog bed from the living room and placed it near the wood stove, where Junot could still see the front entrance and part of the hallway. The dog refused to lie down. Rhett sat on the floor beside the bed. "I am not asking you to stop watching." Junot's ears shifted. "I am asking you to let someone else take a turn." The words stayed in the room. Rhett had spent years behaving as though vigilance were a moral duty. If he slept lightly enough, spoke little enough, and anticipated enough problems, perhaps no one else would need to carry what he carried. Celeste had lived beside that promise until it became a punishment. Junot finally lowered himself onto the bed. He did not sleep. Neither did Rhett. The next morning, Margaret arrived carrying groceries, a legal threat letter, and no respect for closed curtains. She let herself in with the emergency key Rhett's mother had once given her. "You are committing a burglary," Rhett said from the kitchen. "I brought soup. That makes it pastoral care." "You are not a pastor." "I have better coffee." Junot lifted his head but did not rise. Margaret placed the threatening letter on the table. "Naomi says it is mostly theater." "Most theater has an audience." "This one has expensive stationery." She studied him over her navy glasses. "You turned off your phone." "It was loud." "It was a phone." Margaret unpacked bread and a jar of stew. Then she looked toward the stairs leading to the attic. "Your mother used to wait by the mailbox when you were overseas." Rhett's expression hardened. Margaret did not soften. "I never read your letters. I did not need to." She held them in both hands before opening them. "They were not good letters." "They arrived." "That is a low standard." "Low standards keep people alive through winter." Rhett looked toward Junot. The dog had rested his chin on the bed, but kept both eyes open. Margaret continued, "You wrote 'I am all right' often enough that your mother knew you probably were not. She still kept the light above the stove on until the mail came." Rhett felt something old move beneath his ribs. Not grief exactly, the memory of being expected. After Margaret left, he climbed into the attic. Dust and cold cedar filled the narrow space. Boxes stood beneath the rafters, labeled in his mother's careful handwriting. Tax records, Christmas linens. Rhett, school. Near the back sat a smaller carton, letters from Rhett. He carried it downstairs. Inside, every envelope had been opened neatly along the top and flattened beneath tissue paper. The letters were short. Weather bad. Food worse. Tell Dad the chainsaw needs a new bar. I am all right. Do not worry. Love, Rhett. He had believed their brevity spared his parents, yet his mother had saved every page. The silence between the sentences had not protected her. It had simply made her wait harder. That evening he called Celeste. She answered after 4 rings. "Rhett?" Her voice had not changed as much as he expected, or perhaps memory had been kinder than time. "I need to say something without asking you to do anything with it." A pause. "That would be new." He accepted the strike. I made you live with a man who was always behind a locked door. Celeste did not speak. Rhett stared at the stove flame. I thought if I did not talk about the war, it would not enter the house. But it entered anyway. It came through the way I watched windows, the way I woke up angry, the way I solved every problem except the one you were naming. Junot rose and walked once around the room, then settled again. Rhett continued. I made my silence your responsibility. I am sorry. The line remained quiet long enough that Rhett thought the call had failed. Then Celeste exhaled. I waited years to hear that. I know. No, you do not. You are right. Another pause. I cannot make it repair everything, she said. I am not asking it to. I have a life now. I know. That is not punishment. I know. Her voice softened slightly. Late truth still matters, Rhett, but only if the person telling it gets up tomorrow and lives differently. When the call ended, Rhett did not feel forgiven. He felt assigned. That was better. The next morning, he turned his phone back on. There were 23 messages. By evening, the Sugar Road house had lights in every window. Naomi worked at the kitchen table. Margaret organized incoming letters near the sink. Thomas carried folding chairs from his station wagon. Laurel assembled animal care affidavits beside the wood stove. Evelyn arrived wearing her teal wool coat and carrying a document bag large enough to contain a minor government. You were told to rest, Rhett said. I rested in the car between the mailbox and your driveway. Junot crossed the room and pressed his forehead into her coat. Evelyn bent carefully and held him. For the first time since arriving, Junot did not immediately check every door. He stayed with her. Miles came after dark. His yellow safety coat was wet with snow. The big radio on his shoulder crackled once before he switched it off. No one invited him to sit. Miles removed his wool cap. Northvale asked me to prioritize service. Rhett leaned against the counter. What does that mean? Roads to properties under purchase agreement were to be cleared first. Roads belonging to owners who had refused offers were to be delayed unless conditions became dangerous. The room changed, not dramatically. It narrowed around the sentence. You did it? Evelyn asked. Twice. Miles looked ashamed. Not enough to leave anyone trapped? Enough to make the difference noticeable. Naomi opened a fresh page. Do you have the requests in writing? Emails, route revisions, one voicemail. Will you provide them? Miles looked at Rhett, then at the others. Yes. And testify if required? His answer took longer. Yes. He restored Rhett's private routes that night, knowing North Vale might terminate the company anyway. It was not redemption. It was a cost accepted before knowing whether anyone would applaud. The town council meeting took place 2 nights later. Every seat in the chamber was occupied. Snow melted from boots onto the wooden floor. North Vale's attorneys sat along one wall. Maribel Crane presided with her mustard-colored notebook open. She began by removing emotion from the procedure. Each speaker will state a specific harm, provide supporting material, and identify the remedy requested. Warren spoke first. He did not ask the council to rescue him. He asked for time to review the sale with independent counsel. Loretta described the false furnace image and the undocumented promise concerning cider. Evelyn read from her blue ledger, naming dates, calls, and phrases used to imply she might lose control of her property or dog. Naomi explained the connected companies, disputed inducements, and pending consumer complaints. Dana confirmed that a criminal investigation involving unauthorized animal removal and coercive communications remained open. She offered no conclusions beyond that. Miles described the road service pressure. Rhett sat in the last row. He did not speak. Once Maribel looked toward him as if expecting a statement. Rhett shook his head. The people affected had voices. His job was not to make them louder by standing in front of them. The vote came shortly before midnight. Maribel proposed a temporary suspension of Silver Hearth's local planning approvals until the disputed transactions, contractor relationships, and financial service complaints received independent review. The motion passed by one vote. No one cheered. North Vale's attorneys gathered their papers. Thomas bowed his head. Margaret simply wrote the result in red pencil. Evelyn closed her ledger. Outside, snow moved beneath the streetlights in slow, bright circles. Warren stood on the courthouse steps and said, "So we won." Naomi buttoned her coat. "No." Loretta adjusted Sider's carrier. "Did we lose?" "No." Evelyn looked toward the dark square where the Silver Hearth banner had been removed for the night. "We said wait." The word was small. It did not sound heroic, but for people who had been hurried toward signatures, moving vans, and polite disappearance, it was enough to change the shape of winter. By the end of February, winter had begun losing arguments. Snow still covered Frost Lantern, but the roads no longer vanished overnight. Water ran beneath the crust along the ditches. Roofs released their burdens in sudden blue-white slides. In the sugar woods, sap buckets appeared on maple trunks, like small silver promises that the season had limits. North Vale had not disappeared. That mattered. The Silver Hearth project remained suspended while state investigators reviewed property transfers, contractor relationships, and financial service practices. Quiet Ledger received an interim order preventing it from offering certain debt adjustment and credit counseling services in Vermont, while regulators examined its licenses and disclosures. Some contracts were canceled because owners had exercised withdrawal rights in time. Others survived. Warren Pike did not get his workshop back through a dramatic ruling. His buyer agreed to renegotiate after the title insurer refused to close under the original terms. Warren kept the main building and sold a smaller field at a fairer price, enough to settle the medical accounts without surrendering the room where unfinished instruments hung beneath warm lamps. Loretta Ames had her furnace loan suspended pending review. A licensed inspector confirmed that the system required maintenance, not replacement. Sider remained in the greenhouse office, where he continued his campaign against ribbon, lamps, and organized religion before breakfast. The victories arrived in paperwork-sized pieces. No newspaper printed the word triumph. Naomi Calder preferred it that way. Triumph, she told Rhett, is often what people call a case before the appeal. Silas Vane was removed from day-to-day control of Silver Hearth after North Vale's primary investor withdrew from the project. His photograph disappeared from the company website. His title changed twice in 3 weeks, each version more decorative and less powerful than the one before. He faced civil claims from several property owners. Dana Bell's investigation now included coercive communications, unauthorized animal removal, and contractor coordination. State financial regulators examined the relationship between Quiet Ledger and the companies that had issued repair loans and property assessments. Silas had not been convicted of anything. He had not confessed. He had simply lost the ability to operate without being watched. For a man who had built his power in the spaces between documents, scrutiny was its own kind of weather. Gavin Rusk signed a formal cooperation agreement and surrendered his animal transport license during the review. His testimony helped Dana identify the storage yard, payment chain, and instructions used when pets were removed under the language of temporary placement. No one called Gavin brave. Evelyn did not forgive him when he sent a letter of apology. She read it once at her kitchen table, placed it in her blue ledger, and said, "Regret is useful when it changes the next decision." Junot rested beneath the table while she spoke. The dog had returned to Renwater Lake after Evelyn's hospital stay. His physical injuries had been minor, but fear had settled into habits that took longer to leave. For the first week, he checked the house every hour after dark. Front door, mudroom, greenhouse entrance, the side gate beyond the kitchen window. If wind moved the latch, Junot stood before the sound finished. Evelyn stopped telling him there was nothing there. There had been something once. Instead, she switched on the porch light, checked the locks in full view, and returned to her chair. Sometimes Laurel stayed for tea. Sometimes Rhett sat at the kitchen table pretending to examine repair estimates, while Junot watched both of them. No one demanded that the dog become calm for their comfort. They simply made vigilance less lonely. Evelyn created a care trust for Junot with Naomi's help. The document named Dr. Laurel Keene as medical advisor and Margaret Foley as the person authorized to arrange temporary housing if Evelyn became ill. A separate instruction sheet described Junot's food, routines, fears, and the way he responded when a person's breathing changed. The document did not call him property except where the law required it. Evelyn disliked that word. It sounds as though he belongs beside the greenhouse deed. Naomi adjusted one of her colored tabs. The law is occasionally behind the heart. Occasionally? Today I am practicing restraint. Evelyn signed each page after reading it twice. There was no tremor in her hand. The signature looked different from the nearly completed initials on the North Vale contract. Not in shape, but in meaning. This time the document did not narrow her life until fear chose for her. It made room for what she wanted to protect. One night near the end of February, Evelyn woke shortly after 2. The house was quiet except for the furnace and the old wooden frame settling beneath the cold. Moonlight lay across the hallway. Junot's bed stood near her bedroom door. For weeks he had slept facing outward. That night his back was turned to the hall. His head rested near Evelyn's bed, one ear folded slightly beneath him. He did not wake when the house creaked. Evelyn lay still. The change was so small, another person might have missed it. She reached down and placed 2 fingers against the thick fur at his neck. Junot breathed once, deeply, without lifting his head. For the first time since the timber scale, he trusted that someone else was watching the door. The idea for the open lantern room began with a storage closet. St. Bridget's had a narrow room beside the parish hall, filled with broken music stands, old choir robes, and 3 boxes labeled Christmas candles. Do not discard, though no one knew why anyone might. Thomas Avery stood in the doorway with Rhett one Saturday morning. "It has potential," Thomas said. "It has mildew." Potential with history? Rhett removed his coat. The room had one tall window facing the town square and a second door opening toward the accessible side entrance. The plaster had cracked near the ceiling. The floor sloped half an inch toward the hallway. Rhett took his father's folding maple ruler from his pocket. Thomas watched him extend it. "You are making that face." "What face?" "The one that means a wall has personally disappointed you." "The wall knows what it did." They spent the next 3 weeks repairing the room. Miles Caldwell donated lumber and did not ask for his name on anything. Warren built 2 oak shelves from wood left over after a cello commission. Loretta filled the windowsill with rosemary and winter thyme, then removed half the plants after Naomi pointed out that legal documents should not smell like soup. Margaret organized a cabinet of envelopes, stamps, and large print forms. Laurel created emergency pet care packets for owners facing hospitalization. Each packet included veterinary contacts, medication instructions, temporary care authorization, and a space for details that official forms often ignored. What name does the animal answer to? What sound causes fear? Who may touch the collar? Where does the animal sleep? Naomi arranged for Vermont legal aid to hold scheduled clinics twice each month. Daniel Cho volunteered for housing cases. Mara Ellis designed an intake system that prevented original documents from disappearing into well-meaning piles. Thomas managed the calendar. Rhett handled transportation, snow clearing, and the practical work that accumulated around any place built to help people. He did not interpret contracts. He did not recommend legal action. He made copies when instructed, drove sealed envelopes where their owners wanted them taken, and stayed with animals while their people attended appointments. The difference between support and authority no longer felt abstract. It had hours, mileage, and a sign-out sheet. Maribel Crane brought the first draft of a new local disclosure ordinance to the room before it officially opened. The proposal required large development projects to identify affiliated financial advisors, debt service contractors, and relocation companies. It also created a review period before elderly property owners could finalize certain town-linked land transfers without acknowledging the availability of independent legal advice. The ordinance would not stop every form of coercion. Maribel said that openly. A rule cannot make people decent. No, Naomi replied, but it can make indecency more expensive. Maribel looked around the unfinished room. That may be the most optimistic thing you have ever said. The name caused more disagreement than the ordinance. Margaret wanted Frost Lantern's Senior Document Assistance Center, which Naomi said sounded like a place that issued parking permits. Thomas suggested the Lantern Ministry, which Evelyn rejected because some people who needed help would not enter a room that sounded like it intended to improve their souls. Rhett said nothing until Junot entered with Evelyn one afternoon and stopped beneath the single hanging bulb. The dog looked toward the open side door, then lay down in the middle of the room, not near the exit, not behind Evelyn's chair. In the middle. Rhett glanced toward the window, where late sunlight reflected from the snow and warmed the unfinished walls. The open lantern room, he said. No one objected. The sign arrived 2 days before opening. Warren carved it from a strip of maple and stained the letters dark. The open lantern room. Below the name in smaller print, Naomi had written, "No one should sign in fear. Bring the paper before the pen." Margaret stared at the sign. "The letters are too small." "They are 1 inch high," Naomi said. "Fear affects vision. That is not medically established." "It should be." Opening day came beneath light snow. The sky was bright enough that the flakes looked less like weather than ash from some distant clean fire. Rhett arrived before 7 and cleared the walk from the parking lot to the side entrance. He wore his olive combat shirt beneath a canvas tool vest, camouflage sleeves showing below the shoulders, and brown work trousers marked with white paint from the room. By 8, the path was clean. By 8:10, the wind had covered half of it again. Rhett began shoveling a second time. He was halfway to the steps when Evelyn's car turned into the church lot. Junot saw him through the rear window. The dog barked once and shifted before Evelyn opened the door. Then he crossed the snow at a run, burgundy winter coat bright against the white. Rhett planted the shovel. Junot slowed at the last moment, pressed his nose against Rhett's black work gloves, and stood there for a breath. The same gloves he had once used as a pillow in the garage. Rhett touched the fur behind the dog's tilted ear. "You remembered." Junot turned and went back to Evelyn. Not because Rhett had called him, because Evelyn was where he belonged. Rhett watched the dog settle beside her as they walked toward the church. The old version of him might have felt the departure as loss. Instead, he understood it as proof that rescue did not end with possession. Sometimes helping meant becoming a safe place on the road home. Inside, the room filled without ceremony. Warren brought a box of pencils. Loretta brought Sider's emergency care form and corrected Thomas when he called the cat elderly. He is mature. He is 16. Mature with administrative experience. Maribel placed copies of the proposed ordinance on the side table. Dana stopped by long enough to leave fraud reporting guides and remind everyone that she was not available for informal interrogations over coffee. Thomas served coffee anyway. The first visitor was a 79-year-old widower named Arthur Fenley, who had received a notice about a lien he did not understand. Rhett took Arthur's coat, showed him where to sign in, and asked whether he wanted someone to sit with him while he waited. Arthur said yes. That single word justified the room more than any speech could have. Around noon, Margaret handed Rhett an envelope. "No return address," she said. His name was written in Celeste's familiar hand. Rhett stepped into the quiet storage alcove before opening it. The card inside showed a winter field beneath a pale sky. No sentimental quotation, no photograph. Celeste had written only a few lines. "I believe you finally understand that opening a door once is not the same as keeping it open. The difficult part is the next day and the next one after that. I hope you keep choosing it." Celeste Rhett read the message twice. It did not ask him to call. It did not offer reunion. For once, he did not force hope to become a plan. He placed the card in the desk drawer beside the room's blank intake forms. Not hidden, not displayed, simply kept. That afternoon, snow continued falling beyond the tall window. The official clinic ended at 4, but the lights stayed on. Margaret and Naomi argued over the font size on the emergency contact sheet. Thomas produced another pot of coffee that caused Laurel to ask whether bitterness counted as an adverse medical event. Evelyn sat at the oak table correcting a spreadsheet because, in her words, someone had centered numbers that had done nothing to deserve it. Junot lay in the middle of the room. People stepped around him when they entered. He watched each new face but did not rise unless Evelyn moved. His body was relaxed, paws crossed, head resting low. Rhett stood near the open doorway. Months earlier, he had believed healing would require an explanation large enough to justify the years he had lost. Perhaps a confession, perhaps forgiveness, perhaps a way to become the man he had been before war. Silence and divorce changed the architecture of his life. He no longer wanted the old house back. He wanted doors that worked, a room where fear could enter without being given the pen, a place where help did not require surrender, a life in which silence was sometimes rest, but never a wall built around someone else. Outside, Frost Lantern glowed beneath the snow. The town had not become innocent. North Vale still had attorneys. Quiet Ledger still had appeals. Other companies would learn new words for old forms of pressure. But isolation had lost some of its privacy. There were names to call now: a room beside the church, a dog whose owner had planned for his future without giving him away, a man who had learned that standing near a door did not require guarding it alone. Junot lifted his head. Rhett looked toward him. The German shepherd held his gaze for a moment, then lowered his head again as footsteps approached from the hallway. Another person paused outside. Rhett stepped away from the frame, leaving the entrance clear. The lights remained on. Sometimes the bravest thing is not speaking for someone, but standing beside them until they can speak for themselves. Rhett learned that real protection does not take away another person's choices. It gives them time, truth, and a safe place to decide without fear. In ordinary life, we may not face contracts, land disputes, or winter roads, but we all meet people who need to be heard before they are helped. May God give us the wisdom to know when to act, the patience to listen, and the courage to keep a light on for those who feel alone. If this story stayed with you, share your thoughts in the comments, pass it along to someone who may need its message, and subscribe for more stories of loyalty, courage, and second chances.